They poured wine on him, in front of 200 people. The red spread across the front of his plain jacket, like a rumor. Laughter rose at first, a brittle sound that skimmed the chandeliers and fizzled. Someone recorded it with a phone to Roseback. The quartet kept playing for 3 notes more, as if the music could pretend nothing had happened. Jamal Rivers stood very still. He did not wipe his jacket. He did not raise his voice. He straightened his shoulders, like an ordinary man who had been made uncomfortable and chose dignity instead. Then he turned and walked away. If that image alone hooked you, stay with it a moment longer. The Hale Quantum Gala had been organized like a promise. Glass walls opened onto a gray winter terrace. The room smelled of expensive perfume and citrus canops, of waxed floors and fresh linens. Screens along the far wall glowed with the Hale Quantum logo and the headline that framed the night. Strategic Partnership, $800 million commitment. Champagne fountains hissed. Guests brushed elbows and practiced soft applause for photographs. Servers circulated on silent feet, necklaces of tray and ribbon. People drank to the deal, as they might toast a coronation. Jamal did not belong to that shimmer. He had been invited by an old acquaintance, someone who'd mistaken his quiet manner for a modest social standing. He wore a dark jacket, a simple tie, no name on his cuff. He carried nothing to show he had any claim on the kind of wealth being celebrated. Most of the room assumed, with the automatic cruelty small crowds allow, that he was a member of staff who had wandered into the wrong room. Richard Hale liked a joke that exaggerated his power. Vanessa Hale liked the exaggerated jokes the crowd applauded. They moved in the room with the practiced ease of people who had been wealthy long enough to forget what courtesy felt like to those who were not them. Richard tapped his phone, smiled for a flash of cameras, and raised his glass as if the evening were a stage and everyone in it a prop. The mockery began small, a glass lifted with a watch-out laugh, a murmured question about Jamal's badge, a tilt of Vanessa's head towards a server with a smirk. People leaned in toward spectacle. It took almost no encouragement for cruelty to become a show. Vanessa made a tiny production out of it. She held up her glass and, with theatrical feint, tipped it so a sheet of ruby slid down the front of Jamal's jacket. The sound was small liquid against cloth, but in that room it was enormous. The cameras and phones focused. Someone laughed too loud. The host tried to laugh, and found nothing inside himself. Jamal felt the wetness. He saw, in the split second between pour and reaction, the faces around him, the sharp amusement, the attention like claws, the certainty in their eyes that he was merely an interruption to their celebration. He could have raised his voice. He could have demanded an apology. He could have shrugged and stormed. Instead, he took the simplest, clearest action. He straightened and left. The lobby swallowed him. Outside, the noise of the ballroom became a dim thud, like something happening far away. The overlit marble gleamed underfoot. He walked, not with haste, but with purpose, the jacket clinging to where the wine had soaked. The door sighed shut behind him. A server called his name. He did not answer. In the hallway, he found a bench and sat. He pressed his fingertips once to the fabric, as if testing its ruin. Then, from his inner pocket, he took a phone and called a number he had memorized, because he was the kind of man who kept things tight and quiet. "Marcus," he said when the line picked up. "Mr. Rivers." "It's late." "Find the Rivers Trust files." His voice was steady, flat in the way of men whose lives were habit and ledger. "The Hudson Marine Holdings." "Pulled the schedule. I want the acquisition clause activated. Put everything on hold: payments, transfers, notify legal, exercise Article 1, 4B. Tell operations to lock transfer windows. Announce an immediate pause." And he looked at his winged sleeve. "And get our public statement ready. Call me as soon as it's done." Marcus's voice went small and practical. "Yes, sir." Jamal ended the call and closed his eyes. He had never before been the man who called the shots in a room like Hale's. He had not, until recently, understood how many doors his name opened. His ownership stake, an old family holding tucked into the paperwork of a small maritime supplier no one in this room knew had been invisible by design. Papers, trusts, dormant shares, passed down and ignored. He had returned to town from a long stretch away and had found, in a drawer, a document that listed his name as the controlling stakeholder in Meridian Systems Company on the other side of the $800 million handshake. He had not told anyone. He had not thought to belong to their stories. He did not rush back inside. He watched from the bench as a clip of the wine pour started to hop around the room like a flame. Someone played it on a phone. Another held it up to the light. In the ballroom, laughter turned to a paused confusion as the host's face registered that a recording existed. For a moment nobody moved. The quartet's second violin stammered and then stopped entirely. The operations command Jamal had activated was not some secret lethal strike. It was the legal leverage that comes with control over a company's shares and contractual obligations. A formal notice, filed correctly, that could obligate a pause in the transfer and force a revaluation of the agreement. Marcus moved through the channels Jamal had authorized years ago and set into motion an immediate freeze. The language he used with Hale's counterparties was bureaucratic, precise, and devastating in its clarity. We hereby notify you of intent to exercise our rights under Article 1 for B pending regulatory and governance review. In the ballroom, screens blinked. The host's smile froze. A notification chirped. A banner scrolled across one of the larger displays. Strategic partnership, pending review initiated. Phones began to ring in pockets. Conversations folded into themselves. When the first push notification labeled notice, transaction on hold lit up a director's tablet. The man looked as if someone had yanked a thread under his feet. Richard Hale's smile thinned. He tapped his phone and found it filled with messages, legal notices, alarmed investors, messages from the firm's counsel with unfamiliar header lines. Vanessa's hand tightened on her glass. The servers stopped circulating. For a stretch of seconds that felt like a long, breathless hallway, the room had nowhere to go. Then the screens changed to official language. Meridian Systems has notified Hale Quantum Systems of a pause to the transaction and a review of executable terms, effective immediately. Settlement processes are suspended. The words were blunt and immovable. A mutter ran through the crowd. Someone began to record again. But now the subject had flipped. Not the man with wine on his jacket, but the man whose name sat on the other side of the contract. Phones pinged faster. A journalist in the crowd pushed his way to a monitor and typed a headline into a live feed. Within minutes, the clip of the wine pour, previously a moment of rude humor, began to carry a second meaning. It was the moment before everything A single 15-second phone recording had the weight of an accusation now, because it had a timing that could be precisely cross-checked. The pour, the exit, the message. Viewers online could stitch the two together with timestamps. The narrative closed on itself. In the hours that followed, the ballroom emptied with a different rhythm. Plates remained half-eaten. Champagne glasses were set down like flags. Guests who had been the loudest the hour before moved through the room with the small, private calculations of people who suddenly had money at risk. A few tried to laugh off the display. Others looked at their phones with faces the color of drained bulbs. Across the city, the initial feed became a thread. The clip spread onto social platforms. People on other continents watched a man be insulted and then watched the fallout as if it were corrective theater. The markets reacted to the official filings rather than the video. Analysts parsed the legal language, and some funds put holds on planned transfers. A bank, seeing the pause and the attached governance review, put a stop on settlements pending confirmation of authority. The cascade was mechanical. Once the first large institution retreated, others followed. The $800 million figure, big, round, irresistible, mattered less than the new uncertainty. By morning, the headline was ugly in its efficiency. Hale Quantum Partnership put on hold after executive humiliates guest. Owner of counterparty halt steel. Board members who had been scheduled to accept gifts now rescheduled emergency calls. Larry Feld, a lead investor, pulled his phone from a hotel nightstand and stared at the screen until his hands trembled. The Hale logo that had glowed triumphant the night before now appeared with disclaimers and a news anchors parsed words like control, fiduciary duty, governance, and reputational risk. Editorials were less kind. The clip of the wine, looped for emphasis, made Vanessa and Richard look small in ways ink and cameras make forever. Social commentators who had not cared about meridian systems the day before found it suddenly crisp enough to dissect. The viral machine did not differentiate, it amplified consequence. The Hales' panic was not theatrical. It was practical. They had structured their public lives to insulate them from embarrassment. This humiliation was raw because it had been recorded and because it had caused a contractual pause they could not reverse with good manners or late-night calls. Meetings that might have lasted months shifted into deadlines measured in hours. Lawyers messaged and then redoubled the messages when certain documents presented constraints that could not be circumvented without creating a worse exposure. The possible losses no longer felt hypothetical. Sometime after dawn, a car pulled up to a modest row house in a neighborhood that smelled of laundry and coffee. Richard and Vanessa stepped out, with faces scraped of the night's glitter. They did not come with security details and spin doctors. They came with something that looked like fear and shame. They had expected someone to reconcile, to issue a retraction, to call the board and unfreeze accounts. They had not expected to be refused. Jamal opened the door. He had slept in the same jacket. The wine stain had dried to a dark flower. He had not dressed for drama. He let them in without a word. The living room was small and real. A lamp with a soft shade, books stacked in a careless tower, a small plant that had survived his occasional forgetfulness. Vanessa's hands trembled as she reached for him. Richard's jaw was set. They began with apologies that sounded like rehearsals. Vanessa's voice broke on the word mistake and then smoothed into pleading. "We can fix this, Jamal. We'll tell them it was a joke. You can tell them whatever you like," Jamal said quietly. "But there are papers. And there are processes." He had not called them in to gloat. He had not called the press. He had exercised a right written into documents. He had acted as a steward of whatever authority his holdings had conferred upon him. There was a moral clarity to that. The law and the ledger, cold and impartial, do not reward theatricality. "You reduced someone to a prop," Vanessa said. Her hands covered her mouth. The words did not sound like insults anymore. They were an attempt at an explanation for a bruise. You meant to be seen," Jamal said, and the phrase landed like a small, final bell. "If the performance of being right costs a human being his dignity, then you have already lost more than a contract." Richard reached into his pocket and offered a card, a gesture that now read as insufficient. I'll make a statement," he said. "We'll apologize publicly. "An apology won't undo the pause," Jamal replied, "and it won't reverse what follows from a pause executed under legitimate, contractual rights." He kept his voice level. There was no relish in the words. He spoke like someone closing a door. Vanessa sat down on a chair and folded in on herself. Richard stood and paced once, twice, then stopped and looked at the framed photographs on Jamal's mantel, images of a life light on pretense and heavy on ordinary truths. He had expected to bargain. He had expected that a few suits and a few press releases could smooth a thing. "You don't understand," he said. "This was a misunderstanding." It was a choice," Jamal said. "You chose to make someone else a joke because you could. You made a human moment into entertainment, and you did not consider the person on the other side of your amusement. There is a type of power that is loud and immediate. Private jets, boardrooms, invitations with embossed lettering. There is another type that is quiet and administrative. Trust documents, voting shares, the sudden execution of contractual clauses. Jamal had existed on the cusp of those two kinds of power without either seeming to claim the other. He had been the kind of owner who wasn't known for grandiosity. He had not wanted spectacle. That was the moral friction. The Hales wanted spectacle. He wanted a world in which people were not made to feel small for the sake of a laugh. In the end, he declined to reinstate the partnership. He declined not because of malice but because the governance review would protect any future dealings from the casual cruelty they had displayed. "If the terms are to be renegotiated," he said, "they will be renegotiated without spectacle. They will not be built on the idea that people are incidental." They left with nothing resolved but with the knowledge that their options had narrowed. The clock measured consequence with the quiet arithmetic of institutions. Board members resigned. Back channels that might have once smoothed relations became clogged with counsel and caution. The $800 million, which had hung in the air like a dazzling promise, shrank into a problem to be solved rather than a trophy to be displayed. Jamal sat by his window after they left. The city outside existed in ordinary motion. Buses, coffee shops, a dog walker on a leash. He touched the dried stain on his jacket as if it were a map. It would wash out, eventually. The story, however, would not vanish so cleanly. The clip would live in servers and timelines and be replayed whenever the mechanics of privilege and dignity needed to be taught a lesson. He thought about the small ways people are reduced to convenience. A hand waved away. A question not heard. A face not noticed. He thought about how easy it is to see the world as a stage for your own enjoyment and forget that others are audience and actor at once. The technology that captured the poor and the phone that delivered his instruction were the same tool in different hands. One created humiliation. The other created accountability. In the quiet that followed, Jamal understood something else. That power, when it is quiet, often asks only for the steadiness to use its mechanisms responsibly. He had not sought spectacle. He had not planned revenge. He had used what authority belonged to him to call the process into review. That single act did not avenge the stain on his jacket. It rearranged the terms under which people in that room would make similar choices in the future. When the final stories spun out, they did not simply describe a man who had wine poured on him. They described a cascade started by a gesture that had been both petty and public. They lingered on the image of the Hales standing at Jamal's door, pleading for a fix they could not buy with charm. They repeated Jamal's line, the one that cut Festus about dignity. People quoted it because it fit neatly into their narratives about power. You lost it the moment you reduced people to inconvenience. It was not a dramatic flourish. It was a truth that landed cleanly. The world did what the world does with such images. It simplified, amplified, and moved on. Some called Jamal a hero. Others said he had used paperwork as a weapon. He did not concern himself with the labels. He put the jacket in the wash and hung it to dry. He answered Marcus's final text. File the minute reports, notify the board, ready the statement. He made no public speeches. He did not hunt for headlines. He walked out that afternoon, along a street that smelled of laundries and bakery yeast, the ordinary things of neighborhoods where people earned their nights and spent their days. A few pedestrians glanced, some recognizing the name in a headline, some not. No one poured wine. No one cheered. Sometimes the quietest answers are the ones that shift the largest things. The wine had been an instrument of humiliation. The phone call had been an instrument of consequence. Both were small in themselves. Together, they rewrote the evening. If this story held your attention, subscribe for more reconstructions of moments where power is shown in a single gesture, where dignity bends and either snaps or and remember, respect is not an asterisk. In contract sits the only kind of currency that buys a life without shame.